As America was struggling to survive as a nation in the early 19th century, to pay off its debts, quell its internal rebellions, push its frontiers, and decide the issue of slavery, a generation of writers, artists, and philosophers arose in New England, a generation that turned to nature and to thoughts of the sublime and to the unique advantages of their country in pursuit of such ideas. They sought a calm repose and a rationality that rose above or transcended everyday success and failure, from which they could then view life with a broader perspective. These were the American Transcendentalists. In addition to a new democracy under a new federal constitution, New England was a seedbed for new variations on the Judeo-Christian tradition, particularly Unitarianism. As the name suggests, they regarded God or the divine as indivisible, in contrast to the Trinitarians' tripartite God. A progressive and broad-minded group, they also advocated for the abolition of slavery, the enlargement of the franchise, religious liberty, and more widespread education. Many Unitarian ministers, such as William Ellery Channing and Joseph Priestley, joined other intellectual leaders in promoting America's artistic independence from Europe. A great nation, after all, should be able to create great art, and great art had to be original, they believed. These Unitarian reformers and other progressives encouraged a more inclusive application of Enlightenment ideas of equality. The new distinction was that this equality was not founded on the principle of all people being equal before God, but rather on the principle of all people being equal under the law. It was a secular egalitarianism that would be quickly passed on to the Transcendentalist. This ethical imperative would also be a moral one for the emergent Transcendentalist. It was a moralistic movement, a call to do the right thing. In Europe, similar influences were working that would sweep across Western Europe and very soon to American shores. The German idealist philosophers such as Johann Gottlieb Fichte, Friedrich Wilhelm Joseph von Schelling, and Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel were repopularized in Platonic and Neoplatonic ideas about a transcendent ultimate reality that lies beyond our senses in a realm of ideas. These German idealists were read in turn by the new century's next generation of writers, such as the German author Johann Wolfgang von Goethe and the English poets William Wordsworth and his close friend Samuel Taylor Coleridge. In short, Europe's Romantic movement was underway, and like their American Transcendentalist counterparts, they shared an interest in the sublime. In the United States, these ideas were sparking against the keen intellect of Ralph Waldo Emerson, whose essays included The American Scholar, Nature, and Self-Reliance. They would quickly inspire his peers, both those he lived near in Concord, Massachusetts, and those with whom he corresponded. While he maintained his spirituality, his reading in Unitarian literature and Asian philosophy alienated him from his more religiously conservative neighbors. The Transcendentalists and the Romantics, regardless of any particular religious leaning they might or might not have had, were inclined nonetheless to invest nature with divinity. Many could be described as pantheists, who saw God or the divine everywhere in nature. Perhaps more importantly, many writers, painters, and musicians saw nature in its grandest forms as potent symbols for exploring the sublime. Therefore, it was common for them to visit wild, scenic places, including the Adirondacks, in search of the spiritual or aesthetic ecstasy that came from contemplating the sublime. Like the mountains, any form in nature that suggested a large magnitude could serve to represent the sublime. Oceans, starry night skies, deserts, or canyons. So then, what is the sublime? In simple terms, it is that which is beyond the record of the human senses and therefore beyond definitive comprehension. Some common cultural concepts are considered sublime: God, death, infinity, eternity. Contemplating these difficult subjects challenges our perspective, and so our egos, by which our own accomplishments and difficulties seem so great, appear smaller by comparison. The diminishment of our egos allows us to see past ourselves, to see others, and to see the greater complexity of the world. Ideally, thinking about the sublime brings the thinker humility, peace, a forgiving nature, tolerance, compassion, and patience. The idea was that the new perspectives and insights would strengthen an individual's conscience, making it more competent and more independent. Trusting in the power of a strengthened conscience, the Transcendentalists opposed that which might weaken it by preventing its use or by attempting to substitute for it. For example, they resisted dogmatic religion. And in breaking with New England's Puritan heritage, the Transcendentalists opposed the Puritans' dogmatic Calvinist doctrines of predestination, inherent human depravity, and original sin. Rather, they promoted the perfectibility and the redemptive potential of all persons. Similarly, the Transcendentalists resisted dogmatic artistry. American artists, they campaigned, should not simply recycle European models. American scenes, characters, and themes should be emphasized instead. In keeping with the new American zeitgeist, the Transcendentalists were unabashedly democratic. Most of them saw humans as the source of moral law, and so naturally they could not overstate the supreme importance of the individual conscience. They had great faith in the redemptive power of democracy and its institutions to promote both morality and art. Their reliance on communities of strong consciences meant that they worked towards a day of decentralized government and that they favored local autonomy. To create stronger consciences that one day might cure the social ills that weakened their new nation, the Transcendentalists strongly advocated tax-supported public education for every citizen, male, female, black, white, Native American, rich and poor. They had seen this done in some New England communities on a limited scale for many decades, but they wished to see this expanded nationwide. A universally educated populace also would mean a nation ready for universal suffrage. Poor men, freed slaves, and women should be educated and extended the right to vote. Margaret Fuller, who found her interest allied for a time with the Transcendentalists, agreed to a proposal by Emerson to edit a periodical that he would help fund and devote it to publishing the essays, poems, and short stories of the Transcendent community. Entitled The Dial, this magazine helped circulate their ideas more widely. Who were some of the principal Transcendentalists? In addition to Emerson, there was Henry David Thoreau, author of Walden and the famous essay Civil Disobedience, Bronson Alcott, orator and educational reformer, and his daughter, Louisa May Alcott, author of the perennial favorite Little Women, and also the essay that satirizes the overreach of the movement, Transcendental Wild Oats. Other authors, either because of direct or indirect association with the community of philosophers in Concord, we can describe as transcendentally influenced. These include Nathaniel Hawthorne, author of The Scarlet Letter and The House of Seven Gables; Herman Melville, author of Moby Dick; Walt Whitman, poet, whose collected edition called Leaves of Grass is infused with Emersonian ideas; Emily Dickinson, whose poems profoundly affected the next century of American poets; and Elizabeth Peabody, activist for American educational reform. The scholar F.O. Matheson, in his book American Renaissance, published in 1941, reflects on the huge import of the Transcendentalist and, in particular, the astonishing decade of the 1850s. A short span of years saw the publication of these seminal works: Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter in 1850, Melville's Moby Dick in 1851, Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852, Thoreau's Walden in 1854, and Whitman's Leaves of Grass in 1855. In Concord, and here within walking distance of town at Walden Pond, the Transcendentalists took the revolutionary ideas of freedom of conscience and an independent art and made them an inseparable part of the larger American culture that continues to shape contemporary life.